Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's the Hindu Newspaper Analysis, where we shall be taking a look at few of the important articles which have appeared in the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper, and we shall try to understand the nuances and the gist of those articles, that what is it that we can extract from them for the examination perspective. We shall also be analyzing in the process that whether a prelims based questions can be asked from that or whether that article is relevant for your mains perspective. So let us take a look at the topics that we are going to hold a discussion for today. So these are the 7 different topics that we are going to discuss. So first of all, we are going to start with the editorial page, and in the editorial page you have a column which talks about striking a blow against affirmative action in America, and that is about the US Supreme Court judgment which has struck down the race-based admission systems in order to bring about racial equality, and that has been deemed to be violative of the Constitution. So that is something that we are going to talk about, and we are going to compare it with the Indian Constitution, that can we have a similar scenario or a similar kind of a judgment expected in India. Then this is an article which is going to be relevant for your GS paper 2. Then choose a new palette for India's creative economy. So this is a kind of a mixed article whereby you will have both the aspects of the importance of preservation of art forms and cultural nuances at the digital platform and providing a digital medium for the conservation and preservation for the same. We are going to talk about the various issues faced by the artisans and what is the way forward, what is it that we can do. Then an inclusive social policy for migrants, and here we talk about the migrant crisis in the sense that when you have people migrating from one area to another, what are the challenges that they end up facing in that new area and what can be the solution for them. So this is relevant for your GS paper 2 in the portion of social justice. However, many of the times migration as an issue is also asked in GS paper 1 as a part of human geography. So you can again have the cross utilization or the cross functionality of this particular topic. Then after that, Iran's induction in SCO, something that we had briefly talked about yesterday. Today we are going to talk about the implications of the same on the global order and how multilateralism can also end up impacting the global order quite significantly. So this is going to be relevant for your IR portion and GS paper 2. Now certain articles relevant for your prelims perspective, that a global rupee may raise volatility, and that is about making rupee a global currency or a hard currency. So what can be the drawbacks associated? That has been highlighted by the intergovernmental panel, so interdepartmental panel rather, and that is something that we are going to talk about. And PMI signals services growth eased to 3-month low in June. So even though the growth is there in the services sector, it has reduced ever so slightly. What are the implications? All these we are going to discuss today. Now, before initiating the discussion, an announcement for all of you, the budding aspirants that you are. So if you want to get into the nuances of how to clear the examination, what should be your study plan, and how to go about in approaching the examination process and the various different portions that you have to cover, the syllabus that you have to complete, kindly attend the workshop, the live interactive workshop that we are going to conduct on 8th of July at 6 p.m. So this will be held on the BYJU'S Exam Prep app. So you can download the app, you can register on the app, and the link about how to register and how to attend the workshop shall be available in the description below. Now, having said that, without further ado, let us initiate the discussion from the first topic itself. So the first topic, it has appeared in page 6, that is the editorial page of the Hindu newspaper. Now here, this is relevant for your GS paper 2. Now what is this exactly about? So it is striking a blow against affirmative action in America. Now what do we understand by the term affirmative action? You would have heard about it when you would have studied polity and the related subjects of governance also. But what do we exactly understand by this affirmative action? So basically, it is a kind of a governmental measure, a policy-based intervention, which is supposed to bring significant amount of development, social, economic development into certain sections of the society who are not particularly well, who don't have significant amount of resources or who are culturally and traditionally backward. So that is the affirmative action. Now, just to set the pretext of it, so basically in United States, in many of the universities, the higher education when you talk about, so in many of the universities, in order to bring about a kind of a general representation and representation from all different areas and various different aspects of the society, there has been a kind of a different admission system in the sense that racial diversity is maintained, and that was challenged in the US Supreme Court. And US Supreme Court has basically struck down this admission policy. And the United States Supreme Court has basically termed it as violative of the various different amendments and the articles associated in the US Constitution. It talks about the equal protection. That equal protection aspect is being violated as per the US Supreme Court. So let us analyze this article, what this article tells us about it, and also we will be analyzing whether that can be possible in India also, and what have been the reasons cited by the US Supreme Court as US Supreme Court has struck down this decision. So the case in point, the case which is in discussion is basically Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard. This was the case which reached the ambit of US Supreme Court. And there, the US Supreme Court made the judgment and issued the various different aspects of the judgment which struck down this admission policy. And basically the Chief Justice also made a remarkable or a kind of a remark which made a lot of headlines, and that is eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. Now, when we talk about racial discrimination or ethnicity and ethnicity based discrimination which happens, so always there has been a kind of a point of view in terms of the social thinkers and the sociologists that this will be able to, or we'll be able to put an end to this system only if we bring significant amount of diversity in our education system, in our governmental policy making level, and in various different civil society organizations also. So the importance of diversity, how do you maintain that diversity in the educational system, for example? There is one approach where you talk about that, okay, let the meritorious people compete, and the meritorious people automatically, whoever will reach there will, at the end of the day, they will proceed further in their career and in their lives. But here we oftentimes ignore the fact that you have many ethnicities, many racial aspects where education, for example, has been ignored traditionally for maybe hundreds of years, for decades and centuries. So in those areas and in those sections of population, it is absolutely impossible for them to suddenly come in and have their representation at the highest echelons of the educational system. So that is why, in order to bring that racial diversity into the frame and in order to make that a reality, many of the colleges in their application form, they seek that racial diversity, and in a way they encourage it, that if, let's say, you belong from a certain racial group, you will be given a set of priority in order to maintain the overall diversity level of the intake of the students. Now, obviously, this created a lot of various types of grievances amongst other sections of the population who said that this is an unfair system. And earlier, the Supreme Court did not agree to them, but this time, the Supreme Court, in an articulated judgment, actually told about and actually passed a judgment where it talked about the basic reasons why this is violative of the equal protection aspect of the US Constitution under Amendment 14 of the US Constitution. So here, what are the reasons which have been cited? The basic reason which has been cited is that equal protection clause is colorblind. Now that equal protection clause has been highlighted as per 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment to US Constitution. Now, equal protection clause. So it is very similar to Article 14 of our Indian Constitution, but then the implications of it are very, very different. So Equal Protection Clause basically refers to the aspect that every citizen, every individual will be provided an equal level of protection. Now, here, the judgment basically tells us that, look, if you are providing equal level of protection to anybody, how can you then think about that people with color or people with racial diversity, they should be provided greater level of protection or lesser level of protection? So everybody should be looked at the same lens and with the same lens. And that is where it has cited the prime reason for striking down this policy. So that was said that it is colorblind, that is independent. It is independent of racial representation. Then, other than that, when we talk about the other reasons cited, lack of justification, what does that mean? So basically, as per the US laws, you need to be able to, whenever you are providing any such grounds for, let's say, a kind of a preferable admission standards, etc., you need to be able to provide a justification in the sense that how is it going to help the state? So you need to provide a kind of a tangible outcome of it. That whatever you are providing, what is the tangible outcome? In the sense that if, let's say, I'm providing a kind of a racial diversity, I'm allowing the racial diversity to be represented in the universities, what will be the tangible outcome in terms of the state concerned, that is the country? Now, whenever you have affirmative actions, the tangibility of it is always a question mark, because the result of it is oftentimes far-fetched and oftentimes that is something which passes on in multiple generations. For example, just take it in a very simple sense. For example, consider a family who has been deprived for decades and centuries, and you can very easily associate it with the caste system of our country, even though it is very different from the racial aspect that has been passed on and that is being looked upon in United States. But just to give you a kind of an analogy that how it works out. So suppose you take or consider a family living in the hinterland in one of the rural areas of India, and suppose that family traditionally, culturally, historically, that community has not very well been endowed with, let's say, economic aspect or social justice, and they are living in abject poverty and absolute discrimination. Now one individual out of that family, let's suppose, goes to an educational institution and studies something at a higher level. Maybe he or she gets a job. Now that does not mean that immediately the entire community will observe a remarked increase in their maybe per capita income or social indicators. But what it definitely means is that the following generation will have a better opportunity. And if you handhold the following couple of generations again, then the result will be something which will be very good. So that is why the tangible benefit associated with such affirmative actions, they have a time lag and they have a generational lag also, which you cannot always express in economic terms, in terms of, okay, this will be the benefit in per capita income of the country, etc. So that was cited as a reason for striking down this admission policy. So lack of justification in the sense the benefit to the state. Here state refers to the nation or the country concerned, to the state in tangible terms. Then, after that, another reason which was cited was that, look, any affirmative action that you take, any affirmative action for which you create a policy for, now you need to have a set target in mind. That is that, let's say, I will provide it for 10 years or 20 years in which I am supposed to achieve my goal of maybe diversity in educational institutions, diversity in governance, diversity in, let's say, employment, etc. So that is what is the sunset clause. So when you talk about the sunset clause, it talks about till when is that action going to be in play and what is the benefit that you are going to accrue till that point of time. Now, this admission policy did not have any sunset clause. Just like in the case of the reservation system in our country, you would have observed that we don't have a particular sunset clause. A very stringent sunset clause is not there. Whatever clauses are there is oftentimes a bit flexible in the sense. So that is why the lack of sunset clause in that affirmative action was again deemed to be a sticking point. And eventually, what was cited was something bordering on the bit of an absurdity, that all these affirmative actions that you are providing, it should not rely on stereotypes. Stereotypes in the sense that, for example, let's suppose in the case of the United States, the stereotypical consideration is that people of racial color or people of color in general, or African Americans, which is a large section of the minority section, so they are educationally backward, they are socially, culturally not at the same level as the majority of the population. So that is a kind of a understanding and a social strata which exists in United States. So the Supreme Court has said that don't believe any such stereotypes just like this. Bring us the exact hard point evidences, and then maybe that your point or your argument stands a consideration. Otherwise, it is just playing in the hands of the stereotypes. So that is where stereotypes, when it was mentioned, that puts to question everything and every aspect of social understanding that one has about the ethnic minorities, about the racial minorities which are present in any society. Because eventually, how do these stereotypes develop? The stereotypes, oftentimes they are wrong. More often than not, they are wrong, but they have a base in a far-fetched reality. And there have been various different studies which have been maintained, which have been done, which does tell you that when it comes to people with color in United States, the largest number of convicts, the largest number of under trials, the section of population with the least amount of education, the section of population with the least amount of per capita income, all of that belongs to those minorities. And this is where Supreme Court has not entertained that argument at all. So that is why in many aspects the entire judgment is deemed to be very retrograde, to say it to the modest category. It is not to the ambit or to the standardization of the Supreme Court which generally sets up. Now here, generally when we observe that in India also many of the judgments which are passed by the Supreme Court, oftentimes they take the citation from the US Supreme Court judgments or the Supreme Court judgments across the globe. Now, this article talks about the possibility that in India, the affirmative action is what? We provide reservation. We provide reservation in education. We provide reservation in employment. And oftentimes you would have observed that these are challenged in the Supreme Court, in the High Court, and in various different tribunals as well. So here, the analysis is, can this happen in India? And a comparative understanding of these basic features of the two constitutions. Remember, in the syllabus, you have a significant portion of the syllabus being mentioned as a comparative study of different constitutions. So that is why this becomes much more relevant and important as well. Now here, while in United States, there is an overarching aspect of equal protection, but there is no room for allowing the affirmative action in the Constitution. It is not enshrined in the Constitution. It is based on the individual policy level making which is done from time to time. So in United States, you don't have any affirmative action mentioned in the Constitution or enshrined in the Constitution. But what about India? Do you think we have that being mentioned in India? Absolutely yes. In India, Article 15 and 16 of the Fundamental Rights, the Part 3 of the Constitution, that allows affirmative action for socially and culturally backward section of the society. So you have the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, the other backward classes of the society. Now they have been given a kind of a reservation system, and that is enshrined within that article itself. So you have Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, more particularly so Article 15 and Article 16. So they talk about reservation where? Reservation in the ambit of education and employment. And this is where you have to be appreciative of the foresightedness and the farsightedness, in fact, of the constitution framers of our country, where they put it in the constitution so that least amount of controversy is created by this. And that is where they have understood, and they had understood at that point of time, that you have a large strata of the population who don't have the same privileges as the rest of the population, who don't have the same level of upbringing as the rest of the population. So obviously their chances to excel, their chances to stand at the same footing is significantly hampered. And that is why that affirmative push, if you provide, that will be able to provide the social economic justice in the truest sense, as we have mentioned even in the preamble. So that is where Indian Constitution has a significant departure from the US Constitution. And then the notion of equality. So in Indian Constitution also, in Article 14, that is in the Part 3 of Indian Constitution and in the part of fundamental rights, in Article 14 we talk about the right to equality. And in US also you have the aspect of equal protection, but both of them are different. And here you have the two aspects, that is formal aspect of the notion of equality and the substantive aspect of the notion of equality. What is the difference? So when we say the formal aspect of the notion of equality, that is being followed in the United States. And what it means is something that we looked at, that equal protection clause is colorblind. That is, you take it prima facie, that equality means equality. Regardless of, if, let's suppose, to put it in a simple analogy, let's suppose two people are running in a race. Now if someone starts from 50 meters behind you, obviously that person will never be able to catch up very easily, or even at the same rate as you are moving. So that person is at a disadvantage. But the US Constitution, and as per the US laws, that does not count. It means equal protection means everybody will be treated equally. You have a prima facie treatment of equality, and that oftentimes neglects the social backdrop, the cultural, the ethnic upbringing, or not the ethnic upbringing rather, but the various different racial aspects which have been present and have been a social reality for a long period of time. Whereas in India, as famously remarked by a Supreme Court Chief Justice as well, that in India, equality, it is deemed to be achieved, but then does not mean everybody starts from the equal footing. So there is a lot of scope for providing affirmative action. And that is why in India, it is cited that reservation is not antithetical to equality, but it is a tool to attain that equality. And that is the substantive meaning of the notion of equality. So in India, this is what is observed, that it is, for example, it is cited that reservation after all is also an affirmative action, isn't it? So reservation is not antithetical to equality, but is a tool to achieve. And this is again where we have a significant departure from the norms of the US Constitution, and this is again where the affirmative actions in India stand on a much more sure footing as compared to United States. And then other aspect is the test for constitutionality, whether any norm, any policy, any rule, whether it is constitutional or not. So in the case of United States, what is deemed as constitutional or what is deemed as legal in the case of equal protection is, as we have talked, wherever you can provide a tangible benefit or a sure shot justification for the state benefit, that how the country or the nation will benefit as a result of your action, and what is the tangible outcome. So in United States, that tangibility is very hard to gauge. Whereas when we talk about India, in India, we talk about employment, we talk about education. Now the states, they release that data, the country releases the data about the representation of people from various backgrounds in, let's say, in higher education, and number of enrollments in higher education from different backgrounds. Then in bureaucracy, what is the representation of different sections of population. So in India, that data is frequently released, due to which we have a clear-cut idea about what is the purpose that we are trying to solve. So that is where the test for constitutionality as well in India is much more result oriented in the long run process, whereas in the case of United States, it is a kind of a short term view that they take, that what is the tangible benefit. For example, let's consider for an example the University of Harvard itself. Now Harvard, suppose it says that we want to bring about diversity. Okay, diversity where? Diversity, let's say, in the students council, or diversity, let's say, in the students body. Now once you have people of color who have been elected and who have reached there, then what? How will you justify providing that method of admission system for the coming generation? Because you already have that diversity in your student body. How do you justify that? Why do you need to keep on doing that? So that is a problem. In India, we can fall back upon the data that, look, despite of that affirmative action that we are providing, you still have large sections of the socially, culturally backward sections of the society who are not particularly well endowed in terms of the economic aspects as well. Now that large section of population still doesn't have representation in government jobs, in bureaucracy, and in other areas. So that is again a kind of a testament of the foresightedness of the Indian Constitution framers, and that is why in India such a law cannot be expected to be crossed over by the Supreme Court. So that is the gist of this article. So a quick recap about what we looked at in this article. So here we talked about the case in itself, what were the exact logic and the reasons cited by the Supreme Court in striking down that admission policy, and then whether that can be possible in India or not, and why is it and how is it that the Indian Constitution is different from the US Constitution in that regards. Okay? Now, after that, choose a new palette for India's creative economy. Now, this is basically a representation or a combined aspect of preservation of art and culture and traditional methods of art and culture and putting them on the digital medium. So this article talks about the various different artisans of the country coming from different parts of the country and having different backgrounds. They are representatives of their own region and their own cultural tradition. India is a country which oftentimes has always been cited historically as the melting pot of civilizations. And famously, every 100 kilometers that you go, the cultural beliefs, the traditional systems, the cuisine, the food, the language, everything changes. So obviously the art forms, they also indicate a very high degree of variety across different parts of the country. Now these artisans coming from different parts of the country, now they are taking up to the digital medium. And there needs to be a significant upkeep and a significant training needing to be provided for them, because many of these artisans across the various parts of the country, they are slowly and steadily being phased out because of lack of attention, because of lack of economic remuneration, etc. So here we are going to analyze in a very brief manner what are the challenges faced by the various artisans across the different parts of the country and what can be done with the help of the digital medium and the digital mechanism. So first of all, the economic sustainability. That economic sustainability in itself is in question, because you would also be aware of the fact that many of the artisans in different parts, they don't earn enough. They don't have enough source of income to sustain themselves. So obviously representing their own art form takes a back seat, and oftentimes they go for other methods of, let's say, income earning, due to which that art form gets lost. So due to this lack of economic sustainability, you do not have enough artisans coming up and many art forms are getting lost. Then you have lack of market access. What does that mean? So market access here is both domestic as well as international. So, domestic market access or international market access here basically refers to the fact that these artisans, the material or the art that they come up with, now whether they are able to sell it or not, and whether there is a visibility of their artwork or not. So many of us, even if we consider us individuals, many of us would not be aware of the art forms existent in different states of our own country, let alone the international community being aware of these art forms. So there is a very reduced visibility, and that visibility, when it is reduced, visibility if it is less, means what? It means the demand for the art form will also be significantly less. There won't be greater demand and people won't be able to earn enough, and they don't have the availability or access to international or global markets easily available. Now, preservation of art forms is taking a hit due to this. Many of the intangible art forms, for example, certain kinds of music or certain kinds of theater, etc., they are getting lost because the people, due to lack of economic incentive, they are moving to other areas of occupation. Then there is a lesser amount of financial grant provided. In various different countries, you will observe that the artisans, they are sponsored by the private sector, the government sector in many of the cases, and that is how they are able to sustain themselves and sustain their occupation. In India, that financing is not transparent. That financing is there, but it is there in very selected circles. So if you belong to those circles, you will be provided the financing help. If you don't belong from that circle, well, you will be devoid of any other form of support. So the selection criteria for financial grants, that is not transparent. It lacks transparency. And wherever it is being made available, it has been found that it is largely urban centric. Means what? It means that around the urban, large conglomerate, urban areas that you have, in those areas, people belonging from those areas, they are more successful in taking those financial grants, whereas people from the rural areas, they don't have exposure, they don't have awareness, and oftentimes they are left behind in the race, due to which, again, the same processes and the same challenges they present before us. Then lack of promotion as brands. So these individual artisans, they represent an art form in themselves. So they need to be promoted as a brand in themselves. They need to be provided that level of encouragement. That level of necessary encouragement needs to be provided. Then there's a lack of exposure. Exposure to what? Lack of exposure in terms of what are the international business practices. How is it that you are going to market and sell your products to the global audience? What is it that the global audience demands or requires? That lack of exposure is foretelling. As a consequence, many intricate artworks, they are left unsold, whereas in the international market, many of the poorer art forms, you will find they are being sold at exorbitant prices because our artisans, they have not been exposed to that international scenario. Then there is also prevalent cybercrime. The artisans, their prime role or their prime domain of expertise is that art form. It is not how to come on that digital medium. So as a result of that, many of the time they fall victims to cyber crimes. Many of the times there is a copyright infringement that they are not even aware of. And nowadays, in the scenario of artificial intelligence, your art form can easily be copied with certain variation by some individual sitting in his room. And as a result of that, you lose the entire proprietary ownership of your art form. So that cybercrime, here again, there is a significant lack of awareness. So overall, if you have to basically concise everything in a couple of points, lack of awareness and exposure at the side of the artisans, and also lack of proper support. a framework support, and that support needs to be transparent. See, in the name of support, you do have few private sectors, you do have certain government schemes who do provide support to the artisans. But many of these grants provided by certain universities also, they are taken up by the affluent people in the urban areas, whereas the poorer section, the people who are real representatives of the artwork, they are oftentimes left behind because they are not even able to reach that platform. Now, what is it that we can do going ahead, or what should be done ideally going ahead? So first of all, sectoral emphasis needs to be provided. What do we mean by sectoral emphasis? This refers to the sector specific programs. For example, let's consider one of those handicrafts or handloom sector. Now, for example, in the handicraft sector, what is it that the artisans require? They require modern machineries. So, can we provide that to them? They require a better branding as well. So, do we have a universal branding which can be provided and quality check which can be provided? What can be the training methods that can be provided so that the art form does not diminish in one generation? How is it that they will market them? So that market, are we able to provide that one market to them so that they can simply put up their products on the portal? So this is where the government schemes are there, but then that needs to be much more pinpointed and sharpened in order to have the executional desired goals being achieved. Then training and market access, that also brings about, in the aspect of training, it also brings about, for example, business training or business exposure. Right? How to sell your product, where to sell your product. For example, if handicrafts are in great demand, let's say in Europe, then how to make your product more Eurocentric in the sense so that people will buy your products, etc. So for that, a basic level of training and information program should be carried out at a national and the state level at a periodic basis. And this has to be done with both the central and the state governments, both of them having their own endeavor for the same. Then community building amongst the artisans so that they themselves form the support system for each other. So that community building and experience sharing, that what is it that they can learn from each other's experience, because all of them, they come from very diverse backgrounds. They have suffered immense amount of hardships in their lives and seen immense hardships in their generation. So how do they keep that artwork alive? So that experience sharing should be done and it should be documented for the future as well. Private partnership should be allowed, and the private sector, maybe that as a part of the CSR or the corporate social responsibility, let's suppose a private sector is given a kind of a role or a duty that you have to preserve a particular art form, a particular form of, let's say, dance, a particular form of music, a particular form of, let's say, handicraft. You have to preserve that so that they select these brand ambassadors, and those brand ambassadors then become global faces, and that is when the money will come into that sector. Then empowering existing institutes which are present, providing them with the basic level of skill upgradation and national and international exchanges between the artisans. So these things can be done in order to bring them all to the digital medium, and thereby at the same time providing them a safe platform for conserving and preserving the art form. Because please understand, art form is a kind of a portrayal of the soft power of any country. And that soft power has got much far-reaching impact as compared to any hard diplomacy that you talk about. So preservation of India's soft power is essential, and for that, preserving these artisans and art form becomes much more vital. Okay? Then, coming to the next article, an inclusive social policy for migrants. Now here, this is about the migrant population in Kerala. This article largely talks about that. So here what we are going to do is, we are going to expand it. We are going to take a look at the overall aspect and the broader contours of it. Because the migrants, the issues that they face in Kerala, almost the similar issues they face, let's say, in other parts of the country, let's suppose in Punjab, let's suppose in Tamil Nadu, let's suppose. So the migrants, they do face certain set of problems. Now, when we talk about migrant and the migrant population, here a couple of points that you have to understand. So migrants means a person, let's say, who has been living in a place A, has decided to shift to somewhere, place B. This is migration. If done on a permanent or a semi-permanent basis, that is migration. Now, an individual is moving from the place A, so A is the place of origin for that migrant, and B is considered to be the place of destination. So there must have been certain factors at the place of origin. Maybe lack of economic opportunities, maybe climate change, maybe social cultural discrimination. There must have been certain factors at place in the place of origin due to which that individual has decided to move. And that is referred to as push factor. Push factors are those factors due to which an individual is forced to move from the place that he lives in, or that person in a way makes the decision to move out of that place. Now, this individual could have moved to any other place, but he chose that place B. Why? There must have been certain factors, economic incentives, job opportunities, maybe a much more open society in existence. So, those factors which attracts a person or a migrant to a place of destination, that is referred to as pull factors. Okay? So these pull factors, they are present in certain states of our country. In certain states, for example, you will observe Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Kerala, Punjab, some cases of Haryana as well, Delhi, the national capital region, and overall the metro cities, the metropolitan cities of the country. You have a lot of migrants coming to that region. So they come to that area. Why? Because of the pull factors which are in existence. And the most predominant pull factor is the economic opportunity. But when these migrants, they end up moving, they face certain issues. So what are the issues? And for this, you don't have to rely on any particular article for that. You would have experienced it in your day-to-day interaction with the society as well. So the issues faced by the migrant population, what are those? First of all, wherever the migrants they move to, there is an overwhelming proportion of people moving in that region. So you have oversupply of labor in those areas. Oversupply of labor. Now, is that oversupply of labor good or bad? It is bad. Because for the same role, let's suppose if you have 2 people applying, now you will be giving them a bit of a higher wage. But for the same role, if let's say you have 20,000 people applying, you know that even if you give half the wage or half the salary, people will still come to you. So that is why this basically transitions or has an impact in the sense lower level of income. Then, in majority of the urban cities of the country, you would have observed that the housing crisis is prevalent in the sense you don't have affordable housing. So lack of affordable housing means growth of slums. And that is where the migrants live in. And in these slums, what do you have? You have unhygienic conditions. And due to this, the resultant is diseases and health issues. So these are very prevalent amongst the migrant population. Then, when let's suppose they go to any other state from where they don't belong originally, or they have come from some other state. Now there is a lack of adequate health care. there is a lack of proper education. There is a kind, in many of the cases, oftentimes they are the easy targets in terms of the, let's say, in law and order malfeasance, where they are oftentimes thought to be the convicts or accused in many of the cases. They are made accused in many of the cases because they are easy prey. So you have, in many of the cases, lack of justice, poor health and healthcare and education, no government scheme, no government benefits reach them, now this is something that is very apparent on the prima facie, that you and I can see. But in many of these, you will find that amongst these laborers themselves, amongst these workers themselves, there is oftentimes a kind of a chain exploitation. That someone in the worker food chain, or some worker who is, let's say, more influential, more affluent, now that individual will hold the entire group to ransom. And that leads to greater exploitation, because they will oftentimes charge them money for protection, for let's say security of jobs, etc. And that puts them or subjects them to greater degree of exploitation as well. So exploitation at the hands of other affluent or influential workers. And that is why they become soft targets in many of the cases. Now, what needs to be done? What is the way forward? So that is where we need to have a proper data, first of all, of how many migrants do we have. And amongst all the different migrant population that we have, what is the each and every panchayat level, block level, taluka level representation, that how many numbers are present in each area. We need to have data. In case of any kind of government policy that you frame, you need to have an exact clue that who are your beneficiaries. If the number of beneficiaries themselves, they are not clear, then leakages, they become very prominent. So that is why panchayat and the block level approach needs to be done. And that is where you need to have data collection and policy framing. For any policy that you frame, whether that policy is reaching the masses or not, that is very important. So for that, you need to have an adequate and a robust feedback mechanism, that the policy, is it reaching its beneficiaries after all? So that feedback mechanism needs to be developed by the bureaucracy. Then rights-based mechanism for framing policies rather than only economic policies. What does that mean? When we say rights-based mechanism, so as an individual, we have right to life, and under right to life, we do have the right to proper education, we do have the right to proper health care. Now, is that available in the policy that we are framing for the migrants or not? And in the general policy that we are framing, are we counting in the migrants or are we excluding them because they are not a part of our vote bank? So that needs to be understood and cared upon. And mechanism established in collaboration with the origin state. There needs to be a mechanism. For what? For seeking justice. Seeking justice in what cases? For example, you have been, just because you are a migrant laborer and you don't have enough defense, there is a language difference in the state that you have moved in, you cannot put up your defense and you have been wrongfully imprisoned. Now chances are you might languish up in that jail for an endless point of time unless and until some good Samaritan gets aware of your situation and rescues you. So that is why there needs to be a kind of a proper mechanism from the origin state from where the migrant is coming, so that there is a proper redressal and justice which is given to them. Awareness. Now there's a significant lack of awareness amongst the migrants themselves. In many of the cases, the migrants themselves are not aware of the rights that they have and what is it that they can avail in the governmental policies. So that awareness amongst the migrant population, that is also must amongst migrant population. Then cultural exchanges. So regardless of how diverse and large a country we are, there is a stark reality that we don't know each and every one of us from the cultural standpoint. Because the cultural upbringing, the cultural backdrop of various different states, they are very different. And due to which you have large set of prejudices which are in existence, that if a person is belonging from this state, these are certain traits which this person will have. Now that ignorance and prejudice that the society imbibes, that is something which the migrants face because they are easy targets. So that is why if the society is much more aware about the cultural differences which exist and the society is appreciative of that, then the migrants will be able to live a much more healthier life and a much more justice-laden life as well. And then we need a multi-stakeholder policy. What do we understand by a multi-stakeholder policy? That various different civil society organizations, the worker unions, everyone should be put on the same table, and then they should devise a plan that how to improve the lives in general. So here overall you need to understand what is the basic aspect of push and pull factor. Why is it that the migrants move from one region to another? Then also the issues faced by the migrants, what can be done going ahead. Observe it in your area, whichever region that you are living in, you will come across the same set of problems that the migrants are facing. So the migrants in our country, coming from one part of the country to the other part of the country, when they are facing the issue, that is something which slams right in the face of a country which talks about overall migrant intake across the globe. So that is something where we have to take a corrective measure. Then the next topic, Iran's induction in the SCO. Now that is something that we talked about very briefly yesterday, that Iran had been inducted in the SCO as the 9th member. Now prior to Iran you had India and Pakistan who had been admitted there. Now what are the various different nuances associated with it? So let us understand that, because see, Iran becoming a part of any global or multilateral organization in itself makes news headlines. Why? Because Iran is one of those nations which faces Western sanctions very frequently and is ostracized from various different regional and global groupings. Now, it has been made a part of SCO and India welcomed the membership of Iran. But then there are certain issues and certain opportunities that India sees. Now, what are the issues which have come to the fore? First of all, now, if you take a look at the SCO members, amongst the major nations, who are the major nations in SCO? You have China, Russia, Pakistan, India, and Iran. Now, other than India, if you put India out of this picture, all the major nations that I have mentioned, largely they are antithetical to the Western thought ideals, ideology of democracy, and also equality in the society. So that is why SCO is now being deemed or cited as the anti-Western bloc, something which India has never associated with ever since the time of the non-alignment movement. So ever since that point of time, India did not identify itself with any regional grouping. So same is the case now also, where the admission of Iran has made SCO a kind of a regional bloc. So SCO appears as anti-West bloc. Then at the platform of SCO, you had a discussion about the development or the requirement of a new security paradigm, a new economic structure which is not dependent on the West. Now, in the present geopolitical scenario where the world is highly polarized, whether you are with us or you are against us, in that scenario, it never holds good for any multilateral grouping to appear to look like the same. That is why India did not participate in the statements where you had China, Iran, etc. talking about the requirement of a common currency separate from the Western currencies and the new economic setup to be developed, new security paradigm to be developed, etc. So that is where you have the economic divergences which came to the fore. Economic and security divergences with West. Now, why is it then, if these issues are prevalent, why is it that India has welcomed the admission of Iran? The reason is very simple. First of all, Iran has been a traditional close associate of India. And India and Iran have shared a long bonhomie which has expanded from cultural ties to the trading aspect. Iran for a long period of time has been a reliable fossil fuel supplier to a country, an energy starved country like India. So there is that historical ties that we have. Okay, so historical ties, they are prevalent, they are an important part. Other than that, you also have the trade relations, and it always benefits a nation to have a diversified trade relation rather than having trade relation with only a couple of countries. It is always beneficial to have trade with as many different nations as possible. So trade relation. Then after that, India right now cannot afford to alienate Iran and Pakistan, Russia, China, all of them forming a same bloc. We have to live in this neighborhood. We cannot afford to alienate Iran out of the picture. And here, India and Iran, they have sought a kind of a partnership historically to combat terrorism. Because from Pakistan, terrorism emanates both in Iran as well as in India. So both Iran and India, they suffer from the same issue, from the same terrorism originating from the same place. So that is where counter-terrorism is another one of those areas where both of these nations seek a closer cooperation. Other than that, the most important aspect, in the SCO, you have various different Central Asian nations, the double landlocked areas, for whom the connectivity is a major issue. Now, India is developing the Chabahar port in Iran. Now, Chabahar port in Iran holds the potential of providing connectivity via the highway and rail network all the way to the Central Asia. So that access to Central Asia for India is very important, because our other route of access to Central Asia goes through Pakistan, and we know how frosty our relationships with Pakistan has been and where the borders have frequently been closed. So as a result of that, that access to Central Asia, that is very relevant for India. And here, it has been done by the development of the Chabahar port and the simultaneous development of the international north-south corridor also, which has been happening. That provides a kind of a meaningful, tangible benefit in terms of connectivity. And connectivity, wherever it prevails, economic prosperity follows. So that is the reason why India takes a look at it from the positive view, whereas the Western newspapers and the Western media has been reporting it and has been terming SCO almost as an anti-Western bloc. So we have to navigate through these times where we have to ensure that even the perspective that is developed across the globe, it is, and the perception is not that of India taking a grouping or taking a side, but India being neutral as always. Okay. Now, Ashu, I'll take one question now. How can this move provide Iran with more diplomatic leverage and support, particularly given its strained relation with United Nations? So please understand that, see, Iran has been isolated diplomat in an international forum when? Ever since the change of power happened in United States, Donald Trump came to power. Before that, when Barack Obama was at the helm, all of these nations, they landed upon a deal, the P5+1 deal. And that is where Iran was being included in the Global Committee of Nations and various different global memberships. But as soon as Donald Trump came to power, so that is when United States started isolating Iran. So this is a kind of a frequent on and off which goes on. But please understand that Iran has got fossil fuel, and there is only a limitation to the level of ignorance that you can carry out with a nation which has got rich fossil fuel. And also the trading relationship with China is developing quite significantly. So in the present day world order, if you have good trading relationship with China and China is bestowing hundreds of billions of dollars in your country, maybe you can end up ignoring the other groupings altogether. Okay? And now land route through Pakistan becomes mandatory? Absolutely not. Then Chiku, what is the sunset clause? Sunset clause, as rightly pointed by Himanshi as well, it refers to that it should end after, if the affirmative action that you are bringing in, when is it that you are planning to end it up? That is the sunset clause. Okay? Now, we come to certain articles relevant for your prelims. Very briefly, we'll take a look at the broader contours pointed out by that. So that is, a global rupee may raise volatility. So for some time now, you would have heard the news stories and the aspect of how in general there has been an endeavor effort made by the Indian government to make rupee more acceptable as a trade currency across the global platforms. So that is why a global rupee here is termed as that particular scenario where rupee is deemed as a global currency, a hard currency which can be used for global exchanges. Now, you had an interdepartmental group of the government which submitted a detailed report about the pros and cons of making rupee a global currency. Now the pros significantly outweigh the cons in the sense that if rupee becomes a global currency, our trading will become much easier. Investments in India will become much more easier, right? And you have various economic benefits associated, but there are drawbacks. So the economic benefits have been very apparent from day one. That is why the government has been trying to push rupee as a measure of international trade. But what are the drawbacks? Very quickly. Drawbacks are that, let's suppose there is a demand of rupee in the international market. At the same time, you need to have some rupee reserves in the national domestic market as well. Because please understand, if suddenly the reserves or the exchange reserves, they get depleted, what happens? You are forced to print new currency. And as a result of that, inflation follows. And that is why many of the countries, they follow a case of a hyperinflation or a running inflation. Right? So in that case, you will have to match and manage both these situations where your international obligations and your domestic obligations, they can stand to be at conflict with each other. This is faced by many developed countries of the world. And that is what has been termed as the Triffin dilemma. What is that Triffin dilemma? This is something relevant for your prelims in general. So Triffin dilemma overall is the balance to be maintained between international demand for the currency and the domestic requirement. Now this can bring in an increased and a sustained rate of very high inflation, which can be detrimental. So you should be aware of that Triffin dilemma for your prelims perspective. I hope we are aware of the benefits that accrue when a currency is made an international currency of exchange. The trade rates, they become very easy. The loans, for example, Indian companies, when they want to take loans, they can take loans in rupee denomination, and that will be much more cheaper. So you will have greater investments coming to the country as well. So that is where the flexibility, the financial flexibility of the country that we had discussed yesterday, that also improves quite substantially. Okay, now Then coming to PMI. So the Purchasing Managers Index. So that is what is referred to as PMI. Purchasing Managers Index. Now what does this tell us? This largely is reflective of the mood, of the sentiment, and also the growth prospect which happens in various different sectors. For example, in the case of manufacturing sector, if you have to gauge month on month or quarter on quarter what is the sentiment of the manufacturers in terms of development, in terms of the future growth prospect, that is where you take the Producers Manager Index in general. So the manufacturing factor is accounted for. Here for services sector, Purchasing Managers Index is accounted for, where you take the existing scenario in question and you take that into consideration, that what is the existing economic scenario, whether there is a greater demand or not, what is the capacity utilization, what is the expected scenario, all of that you take into account. Now if that, and on that basis an aggregate is achieved, and if that aggregate, let's suppose, is greater than 50 in terms of number, so that exhibits a kind of an expansion. It indicates expansion or growth. Now PMI has been reported to be around 58.5, right, which indicates a healthy growth. However, it has reduced from the earlier case of 61. Now, before we move further, do we need to learn these data pointers or not? So be very clear, you don't have to learn any of these data pointers. You need to be aware of the larger trend in the picture, that whether there is a growth, whether there is a slowdown. If there is a growth, what are the reasons? If there is a slowdown, what are the reasons? So there has been a slowdown as compared to the previous month. So what are the reasons? So the reason is that in the services sector, be it the hotel industry, be it, let's say, the travel industry, in general the services sector or the restaurant business, the prices have been escalated due to higher input costs cited by many of the service managers. So due to that higher input cost in certain cases, you will observe that all the hotel prices, everything has shot up. Due to that, there has been a rise in price, and hence, the number of people taking those services has slightly reduced, or the growth prospect has slightly reduced. Still, everything is completely utilized, everything is completely booked, and the sentiment for the future is much more brighter as compared to the previous quarter. And this has generated a lot of jobs in the process as well. Please understand, services sector growth has the potential for maximum job generation. Okay, that is something you need to understand. Now, a couple of questions. So, multilateral organizations can further exacerbate the bloc mentality in global community. Examine the statement in the context of Iran joining the SCO. So, this is something which you can expect in a GS paper too. So, this is of 15 marks, 250 words. So, here, in the introduction, you have to explain the keywords. What are the keywords in the statement? Multilateral organizations, what are those, right? Then bloc mentality, what do we understand by bloc mentality? So in the introduction of around 25-30 words, write about multilateral organizations which bring different nations and different organizations at the same platform in order to achieve a larger goal or objective for the betterment of the humanity in certain aspects. Now, the block level mentality you can explain in the body aspect. So in the introduction, you give that aspect of multilateral organization, talk about certain examples of them, and then start with the body, that this block mentality has been a predominant feature and a remnant of the Cold War. And that is where the world was actually divided into two different blocks. So many of these multilateral organizations, they are deemed to be serving one of the bloc or the other. Then after that, steer your answer towards the SCO. Very briefly in one sentence, talk about the SCO having admitted Iran as the 9th member and the member nations of SCO, you can write in one sentence. Or what you can do to improve the visibility of your answer is always try to inculcate small block-faced representation at the side of the answer copy. Let's suppose here you are writing the answer. Write a small block or carve out a small block and write about the member nations very briefly. What it does, it improves the visible perception and the visibility perception of your answer, and at the same time it makes sure that the evaluator understands that you as a candidate knows your answer. So you talk about the aspects of it, but how it can be conducive as well. At the time of writing the conclusion, talk about the positive aspect of it, that Iran being made a member of a multilateral organization behoves well for the future because it can bring in greater connectivity and a better dialogue between the various nations. Okay? Then, what are push and pull factors? Discuss the ways in which inclusivity can be brought in the development of the migrant labor. So here, what are push and pull factors? That will form your introduction aspect. And then after that, very briefly talk about that they can be economic, social, cultural, etc. And in the main answer, then talk about that the challenges that they face can be solved by certain measures which are rights-based, awareness-centric, etc. And you can finalize your answer. Do try to write the answer, and I would also request you that after this, please go to the Telegram channel, the link provided below, and try to attempt the multiple choice questions in order to gauge your level of understanding. So that will be all from my side for today's analysis. We meet again tomorrow. Till that point of time, take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.